it is important to grow the European tech sector because, this is the future and we need to have a strong European tech sector, both to create economic growth and employment, but also to make sure that we have good European-based services in this space. Then I think it's not necessarily the unicorns as such, but you could say that, the creation of unicorns is like a sign that you succeed in creating new and scalable companies. So I think that's the point with that statement.
And what is the, or who are the main competitors for the European tech sector?
Well, the European Tech Alliance represents companies across actually quite a lot of sectors. I mean, we have tech in common, but in many different sectors and also from different geographic regions of Europe. So I guess the answer to that is that you have a lot of competitors, but of course, I think we are all faced with a lot of large concentration of let's say, market power and dominance in a few global players. So I think we share that most, those GAFAs will be strong competitors of most of our members.
Okay, so tell us how you plan to double the number of European unicorns in, the next decade?
Yeah, I mean, that is a job that needs to be done by the entrepreneurs and the companies themselves. Obviously, it's nothing an alliance can go in and do for our members. But what we can do is to make sure that the conditions in Europe are as favorable as they can be for people who have good ideas so they can actually succeed. And I believe that regulation is important.
What do you mean by that? Do you mean making more venture capital available or creating the conditions right for the entrepreneurs?
Yes, I mean, for example, regulations, we need to have predictable and good regulation. I think we all share very much an ambition that tech shall be for good. I mean, tech shall help solve society's problems and not strengthen the ones we already have. So I think it's really important that we have good regulation where we have fair competition, where you cannot, for example, do self-preferencing if you already have a dominant position, which will hamper new entrants in a market. That's one important aspect. Another important aspect is that we have a safe internet where you have where you have strict rules for what is allowed and what's not allowed, and to take down harmful content, etc., things like that.
So what's your view on Elon Musk taking over Twitter?
Well, I think it's yet another example of a lot of power being concentrated in this case in a single person's hand. So that's why, and I'm not casting judgment on Elon Musk. I mean, he might turn out to be an excellent owner of Twitter, but we need governmental institutions who have clear regulations and rules for how the tech space shall work. And it is particularly important because we have such power concentrated in a very few people's hands. But back to your question about how we want European tech to succeed, so I believe regulation is important. I believe the European Union has taken a very important role also globally in trying to set out modern adjusted regulations in this space, which is in very rapid development, as we know. I think both the Digital Markets Act and Services Act are very good examples of their efforts. But it's also about, it's about capital, it is about talent, it is about being attractive for the best brains to want to dedicate themselves to entrepreneurship within this sector and to base it in Europe and make sure that we can have successful companies stemming out of our region.
Isn't there a risk that greater regulation will stifle entrepreneurship?
Yes, it is. And that's why you need to cooperate. You need to have sometimes like more of a sandbox approach where you try to cooperate between business and the regulators in order to find the best way forward, because things are developing so rapidly and our political processes, they take time. So you can often end up in unintended consequences if you don't make sure that you go hand in hand in this development.
Right, so a softly attitude. Are there, I wonder, specific areas of the tech world that your scheme is planning to target? FinTech, AI, for example, something like that?
Yeah, I mean, we are really covering a broad, sense of areas. And I think what I just spelled out, in terms of fair competition and proportionate regulation, et cetera, it is, it's equally necessary for all sectors. But of course, you have certain areas that are in strong development right now, AI being one of them. And then I think it's important to also say that, when I say that we need fair competition, fairness is not necessarily sameness. And I think that's sometimes part of the problem, that you try to solve, the whole sector's issues with one type of regulation, but the sector is basically a multitude of different companies and subsectors. So that's another challenge here, that you can't necessarily have a one size fits all solution to this.
We talked about competitors for Europe, and the biggest number of unicorns are in China and the US, aren't they? But Europe is catching up. Do you see your role as forcing Europe, forcing the pace, forcing the acceleration, so that one day the European unicorns are leading the world?
Absolutely. I mean, that would be great. And of course, China and the US have the advantage of having a very large and a quite homogeneous home market. Europe
well, your growth
market.
is already twice as fast as the United States. So how do you keep, which is great, but how do you keep that going? How do you sustain that?
Yeah, and I think, I was going to say that part of our issue is fragmentation. And I think that Europe is becoming better at being less fragmented. We need to have, need to create scale in a larger way. So that's great. And I think also there is a rising awareness in Europe that, we want to have products and services that are, more European based, so we can actually cater even better to European consumers' needs. And I think that that's a good driver and motivation, both for entrepreneurs and for our authorities and regulatory bodies. And I think there's a good and sensible cooperation and sentiment. And in the European Union, there's a strong awareness of the need to grow this sector further. And I think we start to see the results of that.
If you say regulation is perhaps the biggest challenge facing the tech industry, what are the other problems do you see facing European unicorns?
Well, I mean, obviously,
especially in Europe, of course.
Yeah. I mean, the digital world is borderless, right? So of course, competition from elsewhere naturally, and we have already seen quite a lot of that. I think we need to make sure that that Europe can be cutting edge in certain technologies, that we can really lead the way and really have this, let's say, purpose-driven approach of making sure that we develop technology that helps society solve their issues rather than strengthening the ones we have.
Lastly, I'm wondering, we've talked about European unicorns, Chinese, American. Is Europe well placed for any particular sector, do you think, for unicorns to develop? Where's Europe strongest in the world? You look as though you're looking up to the heavens for inspiration there, Ingrid.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Look, I think, I think we have, we have a strong, what we have is that we have a very well-educated population, and we have a lot of well-functioning societies in Europe. That means that I would argue that European media, media-based services are very strong. Consumer information, consumer comparison services, price comparison, aggregators, these type of services have gained good ground, and I think that's an area of strength in Europe. Then I think we hopefully will show that we will be globally competitive when it comes to important things for the future, like fintech and like AI-driven services.
Kristin Skogen Lund, many thanks for talking to us here on The Agenda.
Thank you.